Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance. You'll never guess who Karen is suing in our first story. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. A Karen basically sues bees for nectar theft. A friend of mine just told me about this situation where a woman wants to know if she's able to sue her neighbor. Reason? Because his bees are taking nectar from her flowers to make honey, which he sells. Her argument is it's the same as his dog going into her yard and taking balls and tools, then instead of the neighbor giving it back, he sells it for profit. She's claiming his bees are trespassing and basically stealing her property when they go into her flowers for the nectar. She literally calls it theft. Theft! She then goes on asking for what legal advice she can get, like documentation, if she should see if he'll settle out of court. Her argument even goes on how dangerous they are because she was once stung as a child. I know people can pretty much sue anyone for anything, but this is crazy. Next thing we hear is Karen suing every living creature and human for breathing the oxygen that the plants in her yard produce. And our second story. Boss told me if you don't like it, then leave. When I was younger, I worked as an engineer for a small company. The owner, who I'll call Jake, let me know before I started that I would be doing about 10-hour days, 6 days a week for about 6 months, but that I'd have to be flexible. Some days they wouldn't have work for me, and other days I'd be expected to stay a few hours late. This didn't bother me too much as I wasn't too tight for money and I didn't mind staying behind a few extra hours occasionally. I got to work and was told to follow instructions from the owner's brother, Steve. He was an arrogant character who always thought he knew how to do everyone else's job better than them. We butted heads a few times, but nothing major. A few months in, I found a new job starting in a week that paid better. Later on that day, I had another disagreement with Steve. The situation was petty, but it was his response that really confused me. It ended with him screaming in my face, "If you don't do as I say, then you can effing leave." So I packed my stuff and left. Steve was a little confused, thinking I'd just fall in line. He was too arrogant to apologize, and I had a job lined up. Side note for people not in the UK, I was working a 0-hour contract. This means I get an hourly wage, but I'm not afforded some labor rights like a set salary, minimum work hours, or notice for dismissal. This works both ways, though, so I can leave the job whenever I want with no notice. I decided to call up Jake since he'd always been chill and told him what happened. He told me he needed me and that I should return to work. I told him unless he controls Steve and made him apologize, there's no way I was coming back. He refused, so I told him I'll send in my final timesheet. 2 weeks later, I've started my new job. I still haven't been paid for my final week, so I called Jake. He told me that since you didn't give notice for leaving, you owe me for lost product of work. He said if I didn't like it, I should sue him and recommended I should just take the loss and move on. This was complete BS. Couple months go by until I finally find time to file for small claims court. A few days after sending him notice, Jake paid my money, including court fees and extra. He actually called me up apologizing for the confusion. He wanted to know when I could return to work. I'd heard from one of my ex-coworkers that because of the infrequent hours, people would leave as soon as they were told they wouldn't have work the next day. Others would leave when they realized how much of a jerk Steve was. They'd gone through about 7 different workers in the time I was gone and struggled to keep anyone for more than a week. I told him I'd think about it. I managed to string him along for a few weeks before he stopped calling me. The moral of the story is that if you think you're being treated unfairly, you shouldn't just put up with it. Your self-respect isn't worth compromising. Don't settle for being treated like crap, especially when you're willing to go above and beyond for them. The ultimate power of the worker is to not work. Your employer needs someone to do your job. And our last story. I sued and I won. I've been in my HOA for 15 mostly drama-free years until a few years ago when the HOA changed management companies. The new one decided that they were going to be more proactive on enforcement of violations. Not that things were going downhill, they were not. Everyone's home has basically doubled in value over the last few years. They're well-maintained, nice, newer homes in a desirable area. The new PMC, Property Management Company, got the board to adopt new rules and regulations and new bylaws. The board has essentially been controlled by one old lady for about 10 years. I'll call her Karen. Karen has never liked me and about 6 other families in the neighborhood, and we suspected all along that she'd use the new rules to target those she didn't like, which is exactly what happened. Sometime later that year, we started getting violation notices via email for stupid crap. One was for a package left on the porch, one was for a bag of mulch left out. No fines yet, but that came soon enough. Around the same time, we decided to paint our house. Part of the process to have the color approved is you have to paint a 3-foot square on the front so the ARC can look at it. They rejected it, so we painted another one, resubmitted, and waited. And waited, and waited. They never approved or denied the second color, so we waited for the 30-day clock to run out, after which you can assume approval. Then the fine started. With no warning, we got an email stating that we'd been fined for having mismatched paint. Yes, they were fining us for painting the squares that they require in order to approve a color. We were also fined for having Christmas lights in the summer. There have never been Christmas lights on our house. This was likely an address mix-up. We complained on the HOA's website, but were banned immediately. So far, this was all done via email, but to appeal a fine, you had to send a certified letter to the PMC, which we did, but in the meantime, we spoke to a lawyer who specializes in HOA law. He reviewed our DCCR and all the other documents and gave us this advice for the appeal. Just politely say that you do not think that the board has the authority to issue fines. That's it. Don't get into anything further. That's exactly what we did, and the board was gobsmacked at our gall to question their omnipotence and our non-participation in their appeal. They upheld the fines as expected, which made our lawyer very happy. We also learned that someone else had been fined for having too many cars, and someone else got a mowing fine that was intended for their neighbor. This PMC was completely incompetent. Add a fair dose of malice from Karen and indifference from the other board members, and you have a recipe for a cluster F. What we knew, but apparently they didn't, is that HOAs in Texas do not have a statutory authority to levy fines. That power must be granted in the restrictive covenants, and ours did no such thing. There's also a law, CH 209 of the Texas Property Code, which among other things states that before fines can be issued, the HOA must send a certified letter to the owner, giving them an opportunity to cure the violation. They hadn't. 209 also states that all board meetings must be open to all owners, and any meetings where rules, regs, or bylaws are going to be discussed must be noticed to all homeowners. They didn't do any of that. The HOA was levying fines with zero authority to do so, ignoring state law that dictates how HOAs must issue fines if they have the authority, adopting rules and regs in secret meetings in violation of state law, changing bylaws in secret meetings in violation of state law. We had them dead to rights and everyone knew it. Texas also has a law that grants attorney's fees to the prevailing party in a suit about violations of restrictive covenants. This usually benefits the HOA, but can work both ways. Our fantastic attorney wrote a devastating but absolutely beautiful complaint. It was pure poetry. I should have it framed. It was served on the board in PMC. I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but I imagine it was pure panic once they spoke to a lawyer who told them they were totally effed. A few weeks later, we heard that Karen and a couple other board members had decided that they were just too busy to continue serving on the board and sadly had to step down. There was an election, and now the board is controlled by the very people who'd been targeted by their BS fines. The HOA lawyer asked to settle. We asked for refund all fines, late fees, and penalties ever issued to anyone over a violation plus interest. The PMC can no longer have anything to do with violations, they can only do administrative things. Revoke all actions taken by the board in the last 4 years. Add a term limit that prevents Karen from running again for 10 years, doesn't name her but is worded so that it only applies to her, and of course pay all our legal fees. We could have gone further, but at this point the bad board members had fled the scene, so we'd just be inconveniencing people who'd been on our side all along. This was an epic smackdown of an HOA Karen who, because no one ever questioned her authority, had gotten way out over her skis, and it felt really good to see her smug butt crash and burn. But a few words of caution are needed. If the HOA had decided to fight, there's a 50-50 chance that we would have lost at the district court level. This is because in Texas, judges are elected and the HOA lobby is a huge contributor. Many district court judges will grant summary judgment against any homeowner regardless of the facts. We eventually would have won on appeal, but we had to be prepared to go the distance and pay up to $20,000 or more out of pocket, knowing that eventually we'd get it back. And no, HOA lawyers do not work on contingency, and they are expensive AF. Another word of caution for anyone considering legal action: make sure you have a lawyer who specializes in HOA law. Not real estate law, not your cousin's college roommate who just passed the bar. The deck is stacked against the homeowner, and even with a slam dunk case, it can be ruinously expensive if the HOA decides to go the distance just to F you over. You're spending your own money to fight. The HOA is also spending your money and that of your neighbors and their insurance company to fight back. A large HOA could spend $100,000 and make you do the same just to make an example out of you. You need a lawyer who's done exactly this before and knows HOA law inside and out. At the end of the day, you have to weigh the cost and benefit of a lawsuit just like anything else. In my case, it was worth it because we didn't plan to move, and this was the only way guaranteed to stop the BS and get the HOA back on the rails. This is a beautiful story. If an HOA can't be consistent, fair, and legal, it should be smacked down hard. Good on you. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.